Hello and welcome to the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Sarah Brown and I'm joined by Chris Collins. The year is turning and we're now into October. The nights are longer and growing days are shorter, but I hope you're still picking and enjoying the fruits of your labour, packing all that lovely organic produce away to enjoy over the winter months. We've got a bumper harvest in this month's podcast. Chris and I discuss how to prepare your soil for winter, how to prune raspberries, protect winter brassicas, and the joys of planting some bare root fruit bushes. And if you're planning to plant bulbs this year, we urge you to make sure they're organic. But this episode is really all about seed saving. We'd like to inspire you to save some of your own seeds. It really isn't that difficult. And we'll take you on a journey into the fascinating world of Garden Organic's Heritage Seed Library. It's a unique collection of historic varieties that would be lost forever if it wasn't for a small, very dedicated team. So, wherever you are and wherever you're listening, enjoy your quiet podcast moment.
Hi Sarah, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
Except I'm going to openly admit now it's October and my spirits always sink in October.
Really? I love this time of year. I just love it. I really do.
You don't see it as the end
Oh,
of
I
the
love
berry
that.
season?
I love that change, that tint. I love the colours. I love the fresh air. Great time for me to get out on the lake, do a bit of fishing. I just love everything about it. I think I almost associate it with it. There's a smell of it. I love that. As well as there's visuals, the smell of it I really, really enjoy. And I love
mould and damp.
Yeah. Just seriously, that kind of that dank smell. I love that, and I love the freshness of the air, the rosy cheeks you get in the morning, and I love fog. When I lived in Japan, I used to miss fog so much. It's amazing what you miss, isn't it? And but just getting up in the morning and having those thick, soupy days, I love it, and I'm just a big lover of autumn. Really, I love the colours. I love the fact, the transition, the fact that nature goes to sleep to avoid the cold. You know.
Well, I kind of agree, and I think there is a natural cycle to things. What I find myself doing, because the evenings are drawing in and it is getting cold, and I've lost all that wonderful sun-blessed time in the garden, what I have to do is I have to think of projects to get excited about.
I think the work changes. With change comes opportunity, Sarah.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you for saying that. And I have, for instance, I've got a bed that's been choked with bindweed, and I've been stuck with it and skirting around it all summer. So this winter, I'm just going to hurl down a very, very thick mulch of manure or whatever, straw, leaf mould, whatever, on top of it, a good 20 centimetres or so. And then by next spring, which I'm going to start looking forward to now, by next spring, I can then begin to dig out that soil.
Yeah, so it'll loosen that soil up, won't it? Make it easier to...
Exactly.
Then
I've got a whole new bed to work in. So you're right, it's a good time to plot and plan.
Thinking about if I was designing a garden, this is the time I prefer to do it. If I'm moving anything in the garden, perennial, this is the time to do it. I kind of think you can move the pieces on the chessboard a little bit through this next period, and I think that's quite exciting. I'm going to make some big changes on my balcony. I wouldn't do that in the spring and the summer. I'm enjoying it. So for me, it throws up different kinds of opportunities.
That's very true. It's a planning month. It's not a dying month. It's a planning month.
Yes.
Now, presumably, you've got quite a lot of bare soil from pulling up plants. Your beans.
I have. Well, certainly the allotment. Yep, the allotment is. I'm just going in transition. Went down this week. My beans are over. My runner beans, my French beans. I've got a massive bowl of them. But I've cut those plants down. And I'm just letting them lie on the top. But I'm also putting in my field beans. It's funny. We talked last month about sowing seed, didn't we? And a little bit of green manure. And the areas that you talk about weeds, I have an endless supply of bindweed. You'll be glad to hear, and horsetail. I put Mypex over, which is like a porous sort of mulch, square plastic sort of mulch over the top and pin that down.
I think the secret is not to leave that open bare soil. It's the nutrients are going to get washed out.
Yeah, it'll leach away, and the wind erodes it. And as gardeners, I never like to see bare soil anyway, really. If you can use it, then definitely.
But something with relatively low nutrient to cover it. Leaf mould is perfect, and I think it's going to be a question in our post bag. It's a very pertinent question. Straw, grass cuttings, all these things, just lay them over on the top. Even old newspaper, if you can. Make sure it's wet and weighted down. But that will kind of protect the soil, I think is the best way of putting it. Yeah. We also talked about pigeons some months ago.
Oh, mate, you found, they are my nemesis. On the balcony now, you know what I get? It's an amazing little story. I get goldfinch on my window feeders. 3 little goldfinch, I love them. They sing and they chirp, they're great. And in fact, I got up the other morning and there was no feed in the bird feeder. They were all sat there going, come on mate, where's the food? Waiting for me to turn up. But what I've noticed is the pigeon knows to sit underneath them when they're feeding on that. So I get the goldfinch and the pigeon, and there's been a low-level war going on between me and that pigeon since. So they really are the limits. I wouldn't mind if they didn't poo everywhere, to be honest with you, but they were a bit messy. And on the allotment, there's certainly a big problem.
I've seen my cabbages stripped. I saw my chard stripped.
Yeah.
I even saw my lettuces stripped. And I thought, these slugs are getting around and about a bit. And I realised, of course, it is the pigeons. So I've invested in some very good netting and some structures to keep the netting above my prized broccoli, which I'm looking at with great joy. But I think it is a good tip to get that netting out before the winter.
Yeah.
Unless you want to share your Christmas dinner with your pigeons, then get the netting out. Make sure it's good and tight so birds don't get trapped under it.
I think what's a good little point to make is start to come after the elderberries are gone. The Sambucus. They tend to really, you'll see them feeding on them quite heavily now, and as soon as that's depleted, they'll start to look around for your crops because there won't be that source of food. That tends to happen on the allotment, I've noticed. Cages are really good. You can buy them quite cheap if you want to grow stuff in, and any kind of netting. I swear by it, and I want that lovely fresh kale in the winter months. I've got sprouts. I've got so many sprouts on the go. They are my Christmas dinner.
Sharing them with
they're my Christmas dinner. They're not having my Christmas dinner. But yeah, certainly they're my biggest problem. I would say actually they really are. They do cause me difficulties.
You've presumably got a compost heap or two on your.
Yes,
allotment.
I have. Yeah, I've got a bay really, so made out of pallets. So 2 compost bins and a leaf mould bin, basically, in a line. Yeah, just.
And they're both pretty full now. Are you going to be using them?
Yes, they are. Well, I prefer to leave compost in until the spring. I really do. As you've said many times, as an organic gardener, rule 1 for us is good, healthy compost and good, healthy soil rather. And compost is such a valuable thing. It is the gold of the setup, really. So I want it to maximise. I think if it sits there over the winter, the rain will wash the nutrient through. It will leach. You deplete it. You're not getting the best from it. So I prefer to use the compost in the spring.
Now, Chris, have you ever made a compost trench? This is where, as you know, you dig down, you make a trench about 1 foot deep, and you start putting your vegetable peelings and, raw, straight from the kitchen or whatever. Have you ever done that?
I have done that. I've done that. I tend to do that in the lead up to planting something, though. So when I've mainly done this, is I've literally done it, actually, I'm going to run up to planting run of beans is kind of my favourite. I'll compost trench for that. And so what I'll do is I'll fill it up and I'll put some newspaper over and I'll plant my beans on top. I wouldn't just do it for the sake of writing down the produce. I would do it in conjunction with some planting as well.
Yeah, that's a good point because people talk about it and I've never done it myself. And are you planting any fruit trees on your allotment?
I'm thinking about. I've got a big area that's been a kind of no man's land, Sarah, for quite a while, and it's going to go to fruit. I want it to fruit. I want soft fruit. I eat a lot of soft fruit, but again, it's not easy to get an organic soft fruit, is it?
True. Or if you do,
it's expensive, and I absolutely adore soft fruit. So there's a big area down there, and I would like a few sort of miniature apple trees to go in, so quite varied. This is the time of year to do, isn't it? Bare root, always bare root.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't go to a garden centre and buy one in a pot. It's twice the price, and it probably won't adjust as well.
I think they come from very mollycoddled backgrounds in nice nurseries somewhere. They've got a bit of Buck Palace going on. They come out to the proletariat out in the suburbs. I think I have been, all the 35 years I've been a gardener, I've always swore bare root, and I've always swore autumn plant. Basically, that gives you the whole winter for that plant to get its roots down. Most plants toil and die early summer because of lack of moisture, because they haven't had that period to adjust. So root development is absolutely fundamental, especially with fruit trees. Get them in the autumn, maybe get nice thick mulch around them, and then let them get their roots down, ready to go in the spring.
There's some very good organic nurseries online, and it really is worth visiting them because you can get these bare root plants. I know that all my fruit trees have come from a relatively local organic nursery.
And then inexpensive. And also, you're right, if you look at heritage varieties, you'll get varieties that are local, suit your area, suit your soil. So there's much more choice out there than if you pop down the garden centre, really. I think that's really worth having a little look into.
So you're going to be growing a North London apple, are you?
I am indeed. Hopefully I will, and I've certainly got to have raspberries around there, because that's my pudding. That's what I love. A bit of, raspberries and strawberries for pudding, and I'm in heaven. I really am,
And the other thing, of course, is it's the time to be buying and planting bulbs.
Yes.
And I think, again, if you can, source organic. We know that the non-organic ones are treated with insecticides, with all sorts of chemicals.
It's but big business, isn't it?
It's big business, and it makes the bulb ridiculously cheap, but at what cost to the environment? So again, source the online bulbs.
What about price, is it? Because I was worried that maybe...
It is a little bit more expensive, but we're talking maybe 50p a bulb.
And also, you've got the other problems. If you go into a supermarket, say, this time of year, there'll be loads of them in the doorway and they'll all be absolutely penny,
They'll be cheap as chips.
You get 10 for like a quid, etc. And so you're scooping them up. So you do need to do a bit of homework for them. It's a real shame.
I liken it to chicken. You can buy chicken for £2. Yeah. And I hate to think the conditions that chicken has been bred. To me, if you're going to buy chicken, buy one that's been reared organically, out of doors, all the best practice. It'll cost you more, but the taste is worth it. And make it special.
Well, that's quite a good analogy, actually. Good way to look at it. Yeah.
So I'm going to buy some organic bulbs. They'll cost a little bit more, but I'm going to have the most beautiful planted bowl of probably no more than about 10 bulbs in it maximum.
Yeah.
So that's cost me £5.
Yeah.
And I just will relish those bulbs.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to plant my entire balcony with bulbs, so I'll tell you how much that's going to cost me.
You can also get organic bulb fibre as well.
Yeah.
Or rather than organic, it's also peat-free. And that's another crucial thing as well.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
Don't degrade peat bogs just for the sake of
No, well, all my compost on my balcony is organic, and most of that will stay in there for the spring bulbs.
Chris, I'm conscious that a lot of what we talk about is essentially good gardening. It's good gardening tips, and we don't always use the word organic. And I think possibly that's because you and I have been doing it for so long, we kind of take it, it's embedded within us, that's how we would do it.
Or possibly, quite a lot of horticulture and organic horticulture overlaps, I would say. So the gardening I've done all my life hasn't really changed dramatically because I've decided to call it organic gardening. Obviously, I'm not using it. I use organic fertiliser and I don't use pesticide. I'm much more, I think, as an organic gardener, closer to the gardening. I think it's much more of a hands-on form of gardening. I think what happens when you don't organic gardening is you step back and you use artificial means to control the situation. I think that's what it means to me. So I apologise, actually, right? Maybe I don't mention organic enough in many ways, but to me, I'm raking on organic soil or I'm raking soil, it's the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I think because it's ingrained within us to do it that way, and it would feel odd, frankly odd, to go and buy some chemicals or whatever. But I also think you're right. It's good gardening.
Yes.
Essentially.
To me, it's good practice. That's all it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it comes down to feeding the soil. We know that's the absolute tenet of organic gardening is have a healthy
diversity,
soil.
healthy soil. And really, the massive thing for me, organic gardening, is observation, just being in tune with your garden, being up close and personal with it. That to me is an absolute keystone in a way. Obviously, soil in terms of the practicality of it, but emotionally, actually, I'm much closer to the subject matter since I've decided to garden completely organically.
And I also think there's danger of striving for a quick result and a perfect look. I think television seduces us.
Yeah, it does. Television's magazines, I think you've got to realise that, you're sharing your space and you have to remember
Absolutely.
that.
And the whole essence of gardening being a journey and realising that one didn't go very well. But there's another one and I can try that instead.
Well, it's like a bit like, it's the goldfinch story again. I want those characters in my garden. I want them waiting for their growing. What is gardening without that?
Yeah.
What is gardening without that? Is the absolute essence, those little moments of simple pleasure. And I just think you're closer to it when you garden organic.
October is the best month to save your own seeds. Chris, what do you think are the benefits of saving your own seeds?
Well, it's good fun to start with, I'd say that. But obviously you've got the immediate benefits is it's easy, cheap. I think that you've kind of also, those plants are going to perform because they're already in your garden. You've seen how they've done. You kind of know what you're getting. And also, you're guaranteed, main thing, it's going to be organic because you've grown them and you know you've been organic. And I think that is a fundamental part of seed saving, definitely. That's a massive one. And also, us gardeners, we have an expression. If you want to keep a plant, give it away. So you can give some seed to your friends.
Yeah.
But the fact it takes so little effort is really worthwhile.
But I think if you're nervous, if you haven't done it before, and I completely associate with that, it took me a long time to have confidence in myself that I could save my own seed and they would grow next year. It took me a long time to learn that. And I think if you're nervous, you haven't done it before, go onto our website, the Garden Organic website. There's lots of advice there on how to start with easy things like peas, beans, tomatoes even. And we've got a YouTube video, you're on it, showing people how to do it. So try it. Go on, try it.
I think you'll find,
lose.
Absolutely, and I think you'll find I think it seems like if you say seed saving, it sounds quite a complicated process, but it's important to point out that it's not. it's actually quite a simple thing to do.
Yeah. Our interview this month is our own Heritage Seed Library. Now, Chris, I know that you spent time with Katrina.
The wonderful Katrina, of course, yeah.
Head of the Heritage Seed Library. But first of all, let's just talk about the seed library itself. It conserves heritage and heirloom varieties, but not as a seed bank. It's not a gene bank. It's not kept in a cold store. The clue is in the name. It's a library.
Collection, isn't it, basically?
It is.
We can all tap into.
It's a collection of seeds that are no longer commercially available. And we here at Garden Organic are keeping those seeds viable for future generations.
Yes.
So these are local varieties. Things
Yes.
like the Bath lettuce or the
London carrot, the Cockney carrot.
Well, there you go, or the Shetland carrot.
It's quite interesting as well to say about HSL because Lawrence Hills was a genius. The foresight he had to set this up. That work is so fundamental, so vital.
Well, that's true. And if you want to know more about the Heritage Seed Library, again, go to our website. And even more importantly, maybe join it. All you have to do is tack it on to your Garden Organic membership. And if you do that, you can take your pick of the seeds from the Heritage Seed Library catalogue, and you'll be growing varieties which nobody else will in your allotment.
Oh, there's a great narrative to it all. As you know, they're not as important, but there's just a charm to it all, isn't there? That's the word. There's a charm to it all.
But there is an importance to it. We're preserving a biodiversity as well, because once the commercial list was produced way back in the 1970s, this listed all the varieties which could only be sold commercially.
Yeah.
That meant all the other local varieties that had to fall by the wayside, that could not be bought anymore. Now that means you've reduced the gene pool.
Yeah.
So you're losing that biodiversity, and that's quite serious in an age when we're threatened by all sorts of climate change and whatever.
Exactly, and also another thing, if you talk about organic and carbon footprint, etc., a lot of the seeds we get from normal places have all come from China, most of them, so they're bought in bulk over here. So you've got less variety, you're bringing them on from the other side of the earth when we could be producing all this local food locally.
Chris met the head of the Seed Library, Katrina Fenton.
So how did the Heritage Seed Library come about?
Well, we've been around for a little while now, since the 1970s, and we were established back at a time when seed laws were changing, and Lawrence Hills, founder of Garden Organic, realised at the time that the effect of that would be that many varieties that were widely available to buy would start disappearing. He was quite right, and we think over the years hundreds, possibly thousands of varieties that were commercially available are no longer around. So the Heritage Seed Library was set up to capture some of those, and we've grown since then to a very large collection of around 800 heritage varieties of vegetable seed.
So basically, without this library, all of these seeds would have gone into history. We wouldn't have them anymore.
Yeah, you're right. I think many of these varieties would simply disappeared, and if it wasn't for the Heritage Seed Library, because they're not commercially listed, they wouldn't be available anywhere else.
That's amazing. And so what qualifies the word heritage? What do you mean by heritage?
That's a good question. It means lots of different things to different people, I think, and we loosely divide our collection up into three types, which we call heritage. So we have our true historic varieties, ones you could probably look up in a book somewhere. Martop Broadbean, for example, we think records describing this date back to around 1294. We've got heirloom varieties, so these are very often varieties that have been saved by a family for multiple generations or relate to a particular local area. Good example of that is 41st P, a Devonshire variety. It's called 41st because that's an expression used to describe something as really good. So it relates to that particular part of the country, dates back to probably the beginning of the century, and is a variety that's been kept for that purpose. And some of our variety are ex-commercial varieties, perhaps ones that predate the 1970s, where people have discovered they can't buy them anymore, so they've saved their own seeds and we've managed to get hold of them. A good example of that is Ryder's Midday Sun tomato, 1920s yellow tomato that was provided by the Ryder's Seed Company. Ryder's as in made famous by the Ryder's Cup.
That's amazing. I love the way all these seeds have got the narrative that goes with them. It's historical, but it's cultural almost, isn't it, as well?
Absolutely.
So what's so special about the collection, do you think?
I think what our members love about the collection are the stories behind them. The fact that these are not widely available, the fact that they've been rescued or saved in some way, and of course for all of these varieties, somewhere someone along the line decided that they were good to grow and wanted to save the seeds for them. So for whatever reasons, and for some of them it's because they were particularly prolific, looked lovely, had a nice flower, had a good story behind them, or were historically significant for their region. These are all really great reasons for us to have these in our collection.
That kind of leads me into the next question really, is how do you decide what comes into the collection?
Well, we at any given time might have a queue of 20 to 30 varieties that people have sent to us for us to consider, and we can be quite picky about that. We really do only want varieties that would fall into those.
So there's a vetting system basically?
There is a very strict vetting system. Most things that we are sent probably don't make it past the first hurdle. When we want to compare it with what we might already have in the collection, perhaps it's synonymous with something that's commercially available, always looking for something that's a little bit on the special side. So we do have a process. We look at the seed, we look at the history behind it, we'll do some growing trials. We want to make sure that it's healthy, it hasn't cross-pollinated, and then once it's passed all of those kinds of tests, that we can include it in our collection. And that's when we want to have the seed, bulk it up and make it available for other people to grow.
So you've got like a narrative, viability test, these kind of things that you go through. That's really interesting. And I know you've got gene banks like the one at Wakehurst Place. Why is HSL different from a gene bank?
Yeah, we're not really a gene bank. We do have a cold store and we do have seed samples. And obviously our purpose is to conserve those varieties so that they'll be available for the future. But we see ourselves as a conservation organisation because the best way to conserve varieties is to get people growing them again.
Brilliant work, and obviously you're very passionate about it, Katrina. I can tell you really care about it. So maybe in your own words, why do you think the seed library is so important?
Well, it's important for lots of things. You've mentioned the idea of our cultural heritage. There are great stories and histories, but it's not just about looking back. It's really important. It's about conserving these genetic resources for the future. They have resilience, they have certain drought and pest disease resistance, some of them. And of course, for us, with the challenges of climate change, which is happening already, having the access to these kinds of genetic resources is really important.
So at the moment, because you could argue commercially, there's a very narrow band of stuff we use, isn't it?
If you think about how many varieties of tomato you might be able to get at your local shop or supermarket, we have dozens and dozens of different types of varieties of tomatoes in our collection which are not available elsewhere. So having that resource, being able to find out more, and we're learning more and more about what we have in our collection, is really important to help generate resilience for our food in the future.
Food security, we're involved in food security then, that one.
And seed sovereignty as well, taking control of...
Very. So in a little way, I suppose not many people would know that, so you're kind of the quiet hero, aren't you, in the background?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but you know.
Yeah, no, I would say that, yeah.
Certainly, you know, myself and our team, we love what we do, and it's really important. We see the importance of it, and we see the enthusiasm that we have from our supporters and our members and those who grow for us.
It's amazing. I really want to get involved. How do I set about doing that?
Well, I suppose the simplest, best way is to become a member of the Heritage Seed Library. You become a member of Garden Organic as well. So your membership supports the work we do. As a member of the Heritage Seed Library in particular, you will get access to our wonderful heritage seeds. So each year we produce a seed list, making available about 150 of our 800 varieties. And members can select 6 packets of seed free from our collection, plus a lucky dip, and they can then use those seeds to grow them each year. It's a great way to do it. Obviously, we're a charitable organisation, so we always welcome any financial support to do the work we do. And for those members, there's always the opportunity for them to help us even further as those fantastic seed guardians. So some of our members decide to take on extra responsibility, who will help us by taking on maybe 1 or 2 varieties every year, bulking up those seeds, sending it back to us so that we can continue to make those heritage varieties available to our members in future seed lists.
So it's not so difficult, Katrina. I join Garden Organic, I become a member of HSL, and then I'll be growing plants that are completely unique.
Absolutely, very unique. You'll be the envy of your local allotment holders, and they will all be varieties that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. Of course, for many of our members, the real appeal is that they're growing something that's not only different, but it might relate to somewhere they live or a particular historical period that they're interested in, or they just love the stories behind them. So there's something for everyone if they want to grow something a little bit different.
I thought you and might like to hear some of the work that goes on behind the scenes at HSL. Because they don't just store seeds, they also grow the plants that provide further seed for future generations. So I started off in the polytunnels back on a hot July day where I met Seed Officer Hallie. I'm now surrounded by huge plants of runner beans with their scarlet flowers. It's a variety called Bok, and Hallie is standing here with a paintbrush. Hallie, tell me what you're doing.
So I am playing the role of an insect and hand-pollinating our runner bean plants.
Why do you have to do it and not the insects?
Well, traditionally when you're growing runner beans, bees or other insects will do the job of pollinating your flowers, which will then produce your beans. But because we are producing to conserve the seed of these varieties, we want to minimise any crossing that might happen between any runner bean varieties.
So that keeps the variety pure, with you acting as the bee.
Yes, so we grow the runner beans in isolation from each other in polytunnels, and then we do the job of the bee by transferring pollen from one flower to another flower.
Remind me again why it's important to isolate.
So, the importance of isolation varies between the type of vegetable. So some plants, like peas or vegetables like peas, we don't have to worry about isolating because they have a perfect flower, they're self-pollinating, and it's very unlikely that there's going to be any sort of crossing between varieties. Whereas with our runner beans, they are a close flower, they do get insect pollinated, and therefore, in order to keep the variety pure and ensure that the seed that we're producing is going to be true to type.
And of course this is something that's very serious for the HSL, because we are growing particular varieties which have been grown over the years. They have a history behind them, and we have to keep those varieties pure. It looks fascinating and intricate work. I think I'll leave you to a happy morning's pollen painting. You're channeling your inner bee.
Yeah.
I'm now in an equally hot polytunnel with Hallie, and she's put down her paintbrush. We're in front of a huge squash plant. It's a variety called Bubble and Squeak, withdrawn from commercial sale, and therefore is now within our own heritage library. And she has in her hand one flower, which she's going to put to another flower within the squash plant. Hallie, perhaps you could explain.
Yes, so here I've got a male squash flower from one of our Bubble and Squeak plants, and you can tell the difference between a male and a female flower because the female ones have a little embryo which looks like a tiny unfertilised squash at the bottom of its flower.
I can see that. It's like a bulge, isn't it?
And so what I'm going to do is play the role of an insect again and peel the petals away off the male flower and brush the pollen all inside the stigma of the female flower. And then what we recommend doing, particularly if you're doing it at home and we do it just to remember which ones we've pollinated ourselves, is to tie a little bit of twine around the petals of your squash.
So you've now kept that variety absolutely pure. It's a month or so later, and I've left the polytunnels and I'm now in the HSL offices, where I find Rachel, who is preparing some seed for storage. With some interesting brown, scrubby sort of flowers.
Absolutely. These are the dried heads of carrot flowers. So obviously the seeds have started to form in there.
How long did it take for the seed to form on a carrot plant?
These are second year plants. So we grow, in the first year we grow carrots as anyone would at home, growing them to produce roots. At the end of the season, we lift all of the roots. We choose the ones that are of the best quality and that best represent the variety. We usually replant between 30 and 50 of the best roots and let them grow on to their second year. And they produce beautiful, fragrant flowers.
Very pretty white flowers, aren't they?
Very, very pretty. Smell very nice too. And then eventually this sort of time of year, they start to produce the seeds. And the seeds form, each of the little tiny flower heads on the umbels produces a single seed.
So for anyone growing their carrots who want to save their seeds, it's a 2-year job, isn't it?
It's a 2-year job, and they also need isolating because they cross-pollinate freely.
Promiscuous carrots.
Promiscuous carrots, absolutely. So we tend to only grow one variety into its second year in each of our tunnels.
So Rachel's now got a carrot flower in her hand, brown because it's now gone over and gone to seed. What are you going to do with it now, Rachel?
Okay, so for each of these individual heads, what I'm going to do is is remove the seeds and rub them between my fingers. Now,
So you're rubbing them between your fingers over the top of a sieve.
over the top of a sieve, so that we can take out any of the chaff and keep the best seed. You do need to be a little bit careful because they can be a little bit spiky, so if you're doing lots of them, you might need gloves.
So some sort of fine sieve, and then all you're doing is rubbing the seed head between your fingers, and
That's
the
right.
chaff stays on top,
That's
the sieve
right.
catches that, and the seed falls through to the bottom.
That's right.
Let's-
Hopefully.
Let's have a look at those seeds, what they look like.
Right, okay.
Little tiny,
They're
tiny
very
brown
small,
specks.
and
yes.
they also very little. When you buy carrots from a commercial supplier, it's very difficult to see, but they're very smooth seeds. In reality, when they come off the seed head, they actually have little tiny, sort of almost little hooked spikes on them.
Yes, they look like little fuzzy ants. or
They
something.
are like little fuzzy ants, and they commercial seed suppliers run them through a special machine that removes those. Unfortunately, we don't have one of those.
But why
so-
would they want to remove them?
Well, I think it just makes them easier to handle, because the problem you have with them when they've got these little spikes on sometimes is they tend to stick together a little bit.
I see.
So what we'll do, we'll just
And you're going to separate out every single one of those little tiny brown
absolutely,
specks.
they will be separated off
By
all the little.
hand?
They'll be using a variety of sieves.
Yeah.
Getting progressively smaller. When we have a reasonable number of seeds, if we have some dusty chaff left on them, we'll run them through our winnowing machine over there.
Oh yes.
Um,
Rachel's demonstrating to me in front of a machine that looks a little bit like Professor Brainstorm invented it, but I have no doubt it's quite high tech. But of course, when you're at home and saving your own seed, you don't necessarily need that machine. do you?
Absolutely not. I mean, for us, because of the volumes of seed that we do, it speeds the process a little.
Exactly.
But nevertheless, there are still things, the majority of the work and the stuff that we do here, the majority of the first stages of seed cleanings is very manual indeed, from cleaning carrots to podding beans.
Thank you, Rachel. That's been really helpful. Now we're joined by Lucy, another seed officer, who's going to be in charge of drying and storing the seed.
That's right. Now the seed has been cleaned, it will be dried. So it's put into a large plastic tray. It has to be spread very thinly in one layer. And in the tray, it will be put in the drying room.
Oh, let's have a look at the drying room. You can hear the fans. This feels quite warm,
Yeah, that's right.
but obviously very dry.
Yeah, it's a climate-controlled room, and all the seeds are put in here to dry for a set amount of time, depending on how big they are.
And our carrot seeds then will be
Since
here
they're
for-
small, they'll be here for about 7 days.
Okay, I can see trays full of great beans as
Yeah.
well. Look like broad beans.
Yeah, the larger ones will be here for a couple of weeks, labelled very carefully so we can't have any confusion, and left here until they're much drier.
I can already feel my mouth slightly drying up.
You can't stay in here for more than half an hour. It wouldn't be safe. So then 7 days later, they'll be taken from here, they'll be packaged up, and then they're put in the seed store.
And my final visit was to the dispatch room, where I found Rachel again, who this time was busy preparing the hundreds and thousands of seeds and packets ready for dispatch to members later in the year. Rachel, you have the master list of all the seeds that are available.
We do. We have 800 accessions. We have we term them as accessions, but these are varieties that have been formally accepted into the Heritage Seed Library collection. And each year we have to look at the stocks of seeds that we have, and we whittle down from this 800 wonderful varieties around 150 for inclusion in the members' catalogue.
How do you make that decision? You've got 800 possibles and you're down to 150. Or...
Well, obviously the most important thing that we look at is availability of seeds. We've got the world's most humongous spreadsheet, which records every single batch of seeds that we hold of each variety. So that is set up in such a way that it calculates the number of packets that we would be able to provide, not only across the whole stock that we have, but across age of seed. So it also helps us to look at using up our stock sensibly so that we're not wasting any seeds, and also it helps us to work out a good spread, if you like, across the whole collection.
So you've got a mixture of, say, peas, beans, cabbages.
Absolutely. It's about 200 varieties that we know provide the seed for. We know the seed's good regardless of seed age.
That's interesting you say that, because I was just going to ask. Sorry, interrupted by the drying machine again. Some of these seeds are quite old, aren't they?
Some of the seeds that go out to members, yes. I mean, we tried to keep them within perhaps 3 to 4 years, but everything that goes into the catalogue, every batch is germination tested. And we insist on 90%, which is actually incidentally higher than is the standard recommendations for commercial seed.
So then there comes a wonderful moment later in the year, around about November time, is that right? When you compile your final list?
Well, we have a final list is a whisker away, Sarah. So we're down to the 200 varieties at the moment.
How many packets of seeds do you send out?
Okay, so the past couple of years we've sent out about 3,500 seed orders. They take 6 packets each, so we're looking at sort of 20,000-ish packets plus a lucky dip packet. So we're looking at around 20 to 25,000 packets of seeds every year.
That's an awful lot from a very small team.
Absolutely, and all hand packeted, all the packets hand stamped.
Wow.
It's a fun time of year. It's a time of year that we love. We scoop seeds and we count beans.
In your sleep, probably.
Absolutely, yes. I've been doing it a long time as well, Sarah. So yes, it's a nice time of year. It's the culmination of our years growing, obviously. So it's an important time for us.
Rachel, that's been really interesting. Thank you. I feel I've got a much better picture now. We've been in the polytunnel with Hallie. Now we've been with you, understanding how the lists are created and the seeds are sent out. It's been really helpful. Thank you,
It's been
Rachel.
a pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.
And now it's time for our ever-popular postbag. Chris and I are joined in the Garden Organic offices by Dr. Anton Rosenfeld and Hannah Rogers. Hannah, you've got 3 questions for us today.
I certainly do, yes. So the first one is very relevant for autumn. Someone's written in and said that their garden is covered with leaves from the next door neighbour's tree, and what's the best thing to do with them all?
Okay, so I think one of the best things you could be doing, and it's a very good way of getting to know your neighbour, is to make leaf mould out of the leaves. And it depends somewhat on the tree, because some leaves are a lot better than others, particularly beech leaves, oak leaves and cherry leaves, hornbeams are very good for making leaf mould, because these leaves, they've got less lignin in them. That's a very sort of tough substance which takes a long time to break down, and they will tend to break down more quickly than other leaves. We tend not to put leaves in our compost bins because they take a lot longer to break down than all the rest of the compost, so you'll find you're left with a lot of dry leaves in your compost, and that can make it take longer for the whole lot to break down.
Isn't that, Anton, because it's not a composting process making leaf mould, it's more a sort of fungal process which works at a cooler temperature?
Exactly. You need more sort of fungi to break down the tough substances like cellulose and lignin, which old leaves are full of, whereas it's the bacteria that go for more of the sort of junk food, the quick party food.
The kitchen waste, it's a good way to tell, I suppose, as well, how long the leaves can break down. It's like a plane tree is your worst nightmare for leaf mould, because it has a very waxy cuticle. So anything that's kind of tough and you can pull and stretch, it won't break or tear, you know it's going to take longer, as opposed to, like you say, the cherry tree leaf, which is quite fine and quite flimsy. Yeah.
And anything with a glossy surface as well is going to take...
Yeah, anything with a waxy cuticle, basically, like a leaf covering will take longer to break down.
It would normally, I mean, if you've got an ash or a willow or a maple tree with its leaves, it could take up to a year maybe to make good, effective leaf mould. But you can speed that up, can't you, by breaking down the leaves yourself, by running over them with a lawnmower and also mixing them with lawnmower cuttings as well. This all helps in the breakdown process.
Exactly, yeah, I couldn't agree more. That does help. I mean, it can take longer than a year if you don't.
So you want to be shredding them a bit to speed up the process, is what you're saying, and to break them down a bit.
Exactly.
It's quite funny, isn't it? When I was on the parks many moons ago, back in my youth, we used to do leaf raking for about 8 weeks in the autumn. We used to dread it, because it's just like all day you'd be raking leaves. It's only all this time later you kind of appreciate how valuable they are, and it is kind of a bonanza, a natural bonanza, isn't it, in the autumn? So you get the colour, but you get all this really useful material as well.
So if you don't have trees in your garden, and if you don't have a friendly neighbour whose trees are dropping leaves into your garden, there's no reason why you can't go into the parks or alongside roads or
Well, I think a lot of
your own
them.
leaves. Just don't go into woodland.
Yeah.
Because leaf drop in woodland is crucial to the whole ecosystem and the cycle of life there.
Yeah, I think so. I think also a lot of parks now, my local park have been run by volunteers because obviously they've been hit by the reduction in local authority budgets. And so why not do a communal leaf mould bays? So literally get some 4x4 timber, hammer them in with a sledgehammer into the ground, put some chicken wire around, you've got a leaf mould bin straight away, and then everyone can contribute and everyone can take out.
Anton, remind us why we're making leaf mould.
Leaf mould is a very valuable substance. It's not actually very high in nutrients like compost is, but it's got a lot of organic matter and it's also very beneficial as a sort of food source for bugs and general sort of biological life in the soil. So it's very good as a general all-round soil improver. If you sieve it as well, it does actually make quite a good seed sowing compost.
I think it's particularly effective, as you say, to help with the soil structure. So if you have a heavy soil, a clay soil, if you incorporate leaf mould within that, it'll help break it down a bit, which allows the roots to get better access to moisture and air and whatever.
And also good if it's can use it for seed, then it takes pressure away from the peat compost and that industry as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So how do you make it?
That's a good
$1 million question.
One of the most important things is that it's kept relatively moist. So I wouldn't put it actually in a plastic compost bin because it'll dry out in there. So there are two main sort of methods of making it. One is just to put it in a plastic bin bag and leave it behind your shed for up to a year or even a couple of years. Or if you've got a lot more to make, then you can drive in some posts into the soil and put some chicken wire around, and the rainfall will help to sort of keep it moist.
Yes, because if it's in plastic bags, I've learnt, first of all, make holes in the plastic bags, which is quite satisfying to do with a fork or something, but also remember to water it. So if you're collecting the leaves, your neighbour's leaves up on a dry day, make sure that the leaves are moist when they're in the bag and they stay moist.
And is it like compost, do they need turning, or do you just literally leave it to get on with it?
I mean, I might occasionally turn it, but generally I find it just gets on with it itself.
Yeah,
really.
if you've got a corner, a dark corner to put it in or somewhere out of the way, and then forget about it. But do have a word with your neighbour if you can, and see if you can share the fruits of it.
Brilliant. Great. So on a similar vein, someone's written in to say they've got some lovely compost from their compost bin, and should they be putting it on the soil now?
I'm not for it at all, really. I think spring is the best time because obviously that's how the temperature warms up, and then obviously the bacteria and the things that break it down are much more active. I think it'll just sit there through the winter, really. When I worked at Kew Gardens, they were putting it out a lot in the autumn. We were mulching the beds. That was the thing. It was one of the big sort of late autumn, early winter jobs, and it wasn't breaking down. It sit there and it started to affect soil pH, etc. So I'm definitely more for spring spreading, really.
I think mulching bare soil is a very good practice, and we mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, but something with low nutrients in it. Don't waste your lovely nutrient-rich compost. Would you agree, Anton?
I'd agree on that. I mean, particularly if you put a lot of kitchen scraps into your garden compost, it's going to be pretty high in nutrients, and if you've got nothing growing there to take those nutrients up, then they are just all going to get...
You just leach through the soil, won't they? You'll just lose them, yeah.
What you can do, if your bin is full or your heap is full and you want to keep going, adding to it, you can always take some off, bag it up, and then you've got bags of compost ready for next spring.
So would you, if you put it on the soil in spring, do you put it on just before you're sowing, or do you put it on and give it a while?
I would say you want to give it at least a month.
Early March, I think, probably when I'll go for it.
So it's a kind of judgment game as to when things are beginning to warm up. That's when your compost is going to be most effective. So don't put it out too early is my advice.
So general rule of thumb, don't put it out now, leave it in the bed over autumn, winter. And will it still carry on breaking down?
Breaks down less over the winter. It's certainly all the microbes.
It's all to do with heat, isn't it, really? And the warmer it is, the quicker it'll break down. Yeah.
Brilliant, okay, thank you. So the next one's come from someone who's clearly had a lovely harvest of raspberries, and they're now asking when's the best time to prune them and how should they do it?
Okay, I think this can either be answered in a very simple way or in a slightly more complicated way.
Start simple.
Okay, so simple is basically you're going to cut down the raspberry canes that have fruited this year. Whether you have what's called summer fruiting raspberries or autumn fruiting raspberries, and they're two relatively distinct varieties. If you cut down the canes that have borne fruit this year, then they will grow again next year. Chris, you wouldn't be doing it now though, would you?
No, I always associate in my mind, just through years of practicing, of doing any pruning on them, the same time as I'd probably spur apples late winter, late February, early March. I'd obviously make sure there wasn't the wind wasn't -10 or something, or there was frost on the ground, but I would be looking to do it around then. It's a good old warm winter's job, really. That's how I see it.
So the slightly complicated answer, Hannah, is that with these two distinct varieties, the autumn varieties will fruit on the stems that have grown since that spring, in other words, within that growing season. The summer fruiting varieties will fruit on stems that have been growing the year before. So if you want to be purist about your pruning, if you know you have a summer fruiting variety, look for the stems that have fruited this year. They're usually slightly yellowed. The new stems which have been growing this year are more green and more pliable, less woody. They're the ones that are going to fruit next year.
The obvious question is, if you've inherited some lovely raspberry bushes and you haven't got a clue, how would you then treat them?
It's actually not as difficult as it sounds. I would go along with Chris. I would definitely prune them in later winter, because when all the leaves have fallen off, it's actually much easier to see what you're doing. And it's actually really quite obvious which are last year's canes and which are next year's canes. The next year's ones, like Sarah said, are very sort of pliable and green. Those are the ones you want to leave. And ones which have already fruited have that sort of brown woody look to them, and those are the ones you want to get rid of. So even if you're not sure which type you have, then it is quite easy. Just as a rule of thumb, just cut down anything that has already fruited.
I have to say, I take my hat off to this person who is growing raspberries. I think we all should, because to buy organic raspberries is phenomenally expensive and not even necessarily available. And yet we know that soft fruits probably have more pesticides added to them than any other fruit or vegetable variety. So your own organic raspberries are such a treat.
Brilliant, thank you.
Next month, we have a very special interview with one of the country's best wildlife gardeners, Kate Bradbury. Chris discusses with her the importance of creating a wildlife-friendly garden and how, with just a few small steps, you can provide shelter and food for a variety of creatures. You're creating your own tiny organic ecosystem, which will help the planet in these troubling times. So thank you for listening, and until next month, enjoy your growing and gardening wherever you are. Our thanks to Kevin MacLeod for providing the music.